Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Living History of Empowerment from the Voices of Albright Black Alumni, presented by the Society of Black Alumni and the Office of Alumni and Donor Engagement. I'm Ashley Chambers, class of 2008, and my co-facilitator here with me today is Sheila Owens, class of 2016. We are members of the Society of Black Alumni, or SOBA, here at Albright College. Before we get started, I would like to remind our students in the audience that this is an experience event. If you would like to receive credit for today's program, you must have your Albright ID scanned, both when you enter and exit from the program today, in order to receive the experience credit. No exceptions will be made by the experience program. I'd like to begin by thanking our 12 alumni who have given up their time to be with us today for this Empowering Albright Voices program. You can access their bios through the QR code that was handed out to you when you came here today in person, and then a link was provided for those who are joining us virtually. First, I will introduce each one of our guests briefly and ask each person to raise their hand as I mention their name. Gus Rogers, class of 1966. Wayman Clark, class of 1972. Keisha McMillian, class of 1988. Saida Ekulona, class of 1992. The Reverend Aaron Hayes Cook, class of 2002. Chantel Haynes, class of 2005. Demir Postel, class of 2005. Ariel Stevenson, class of 2005. The Reverend Dr. Lawrence Claiborne, class of 2011. April Jones, class of 2013. And Justin Armstrong, class of 2017. These alumni represent 6 decades of history on Albright's campus. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you, Ashley. Let's start with the 1960s. This decade was defined by turmoil, violence, protest, in addition to the passing of the Civil Rights and Voting Acts. And let's not forget the rise and fall of Martin Luther King Jr. On campus, a student sit-in took place at Greenwich Library in 1969, and the first Afro-American Society was formed on campus. We'd like to hear from our alumni, Gus Rogers and Wayman Clark, as to how you remember the ripple effects of these national events playing out on campus, and how students were affected and or got involved in this, how it affected students and got involved. Gus Rogers and Wayman. We'll hear from Gus Rogers first.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Gus Rogers, and this is my wife, Libby. And Libby happens to be from Reading. So and the reason for our being together is Albright and Reading. And this was in 1962. I came to town. I'm from New York, Queens, New York specifically. Spent a couple of years in Brooklyn. And came to Albright because my basketball coach knew Rankin at Albright. And I wanted to get out of Queens for a little while. So Albright was it, and I was excited about it. I guess I could cover my own personal situation in coming to Albright in terms of my involvement there. It started out in a very active way in terms of Albright in August, coming to Reading. I guess the time period that I missed was when Malcolm came into power, and I was actually at Albright at the time in terms of my immediate buddies that were active there on a active scene. And the thing that I remember about that time period was that I did not have the opportunity to learn about Malcolm as quickly as my friends and relatives in the Queens because of being in Pennsylvania. And that kind of stayed with me until I went home for Christmas. And when I went home for Christmas, my guys, they cornered me in someone's house in the basement, I remember. And they started saying, "Do you know about Malcolm?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm starting to learn." They said, "Man, you need to get busy." He says, I know you went to a white college, but you need to know about Malcolm." And my vacation there at that time was for a week. And they got me every other day about Malcolm. So when I went back, I knew about Malcolm. Malcolm was growing in power. Where would you like me to go from here? That was my first initial reaction to Albright. And just as background also, there were 4 of us that came into the class, 2 girls and 2 guys. The other guy happened to be a basketball player also. We shared an apartment together at Albright Court. His name was Joe Reed. He was from Asbury Park. And Joe and I kind of hit it off immediately. And Joe did not finish school. And he talks about it today. Matter of fact, I'm going to see him in a couple of days, how he missed out on a perfect opportunity at Albright. But he survived extremely well. He went into the service, and he had this special skill that he ended up going to OTC school and retired a lieutenant colonel about 15 years later. So Joe didn't miss out on anything, but it was always a gut that he should have stayed. He wanted to stay, but he didn't. Could not. It was just a few percentage points. Let me just stop here, and I can kind of chime in a little later.
Thank you for that, Gus. Wayman, if you could please speak on your experiences that you had at Albright during that time as well, please.
Well, I guess I would start by saying what shaped my life up prior to coming to Albright. So I grew up in the South and didn't get into the North until 9th grade. So I went to all segregated schools, for the first 9 grades. And my folks moved north, for better opportunity. And so I had not gone to school with whites up until going into the 9th grade. It was all blacks in school. So I do believe that when I graduated from high school in New Jersey after 4 years of going to school in integrated schools, that was a preparation for me. And also my mindset was that I felt very comfortable coming to a school like Albright, a school where I could play a little basketball and also get a quality education. And my visit to Albright with my dad and meeting Coach Rankin, and there were only 10 black students at Albright my freshman year when we came in. So I was prepared for that experience. I also want to say that it also was a time of a lot of stuff going on. So I had been and lived through the assassinations of President Kennedy, the assassination of Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, the rioting that ensued afterwards. It was a scary time through my early years. And so by the time I got to Albright, I knew that I wanted to go to a school where I could be a diverse situation. I would have liked to be with a lot more blacks than Albright had at that time, but I was prepared to be in a situation like Albright presented. And that was a situation where I knew I would get a quality education, and I knew that I was prepared to to handle any kind of situations that I would run into being at a school in the North, like Albright. Things that had an impression upon me. It also was, I think, situations like the sit-in in the library. Things were happening there because people were taking bold actions and doing things to achieve change. I'll never forget sitting in that library 2 or 3 nights until my parents called and found out I was there and told me to get my rear end out of there before they came and sent me home. But I remember them approaching me as I laid up on one of the stacks back in the library that night. About 11 o'clock, they were calling our names, and they came over and they asked the 2 or 3 of us that were Black that were sitting together, what demands would we like to have? And because those were the beginnings of things like no more chapel, girls didn't have to, they were asking for the girls to be able to have more liberties in terms of being out at night and things like that. Well, we asked for a Black professor. And that was where we saw Hammett Worthington Smith. Some of you may know him. He came in the next year as a result of that. So things were happening. And so that was a time where, although there was a lot of rioting, there was a lot of sit-ins. I mean, there was 150 campuses across the country had sit-ins, and things were changing as a result of all of that. And I wasn't always prepared for some of the change that was occurring. Some of it was fearful, as a Black student, only one of 10 on an all-white campus. We had a segment, a group of people that were in the city. It was about 10 or 15 minority Blacks who would occasionally come up on campus and would challenge us, us, the few Blacks that were there, as to, first of all, why are you here on this all-white campus? Why aren't you in an all-Black school? What are you doing to make change? What kind of noise are you making up here, and what have you? And if we weren't, they would make some noise up there, and it just made you feel quite uncomfortable. So I wasn't totally prepared for all of that, but it did help me become more aware of things I needed to bone up on and speak out on and just grow up and be more than just a typical college student, know what's going on. And so I guess what I'm saying is the events and the things that were going on at that time, although there was far and there was many of it, and it was all somewhat interfering a little bit with what you're trying to do from your studies and all of that, it was just an awful lot. And so to navigate through all of that through those days was a challenge, but we made it through. So that's all I would like to add at this point.
Thank you, Wayman. Thank you, Gus. We appreciate you sharing your experiences with us. We are going to move on with our next question panels.
The 1970s brought the Black Panther movement, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, the book Roots, and affirmative action. The first African-American history course was available at Albright in 1970. And as Wayman just mentioned, the first Black professor, Hammett Worthington Smith, arrived in 1973. As you see from our timeline, there were many different changes, and Wayman really touched on many of these. So I think we'll kind of just take a look at the 70s here and ask Sheila to come back up and talk with us about the 80s.
In the 1980s, it seemed to be a little quiet. It was a positive time in our nation, and Michael Jackson's Thriller became the #1 bestseller. Martin Luther King became a national holiday, and Colin Powell rose to be the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. Can you please speak to us about what was it like on campus, the atmosphere, what was it like during that time, and what organizations existed for Black students?
All right, so When I was here, there weren't very many of us at all. Could probably count that on one hand, definitely could count it on one hand. And so as far as organizations or groups that were Black or African American centered, there weren't really any. We did have professors and that we could go to talk to if we needed to, but the presence was very minimum. As far as how events affected the student body, one of the things that I do remember is divesting from South Africa, talking to the board about that and protesting and making sure we had divested. That was a very big thing that I'd say the student body in general considered very important and made their voice known. I think the other thing that would come up that you reminded me about as far as Thriller and other big songs during that period of time with Black folk in them, or writing them or in videos and that sort of thing is, as far as air bands, there was a kind of common practice of if you were supposed to be one of the Black musicians or Black singers, doing blackface. I'm looking at one of the board members now, and she is feeling pain on that one. That got to be something that obviously needed to be challenged. But I think, for me, we had some of the other alum kind of talk about their background. I think for me, being that I was raised in the suburbs, and most of my schooling, well, at least half of my schooling was in a predominantly white prep school. The other half of my schooling was in public school. I actually started public school the year that Delaware started desegregation, which was a whole thing in and of itself and a whole nother form. I think because of my background coming to a predominantly white school, again, was a bit easier for me than it would have been for some of my peers. But it did expose me to some other things and other challenges.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So the 1990s saw the beginning of outrage over police brutality against Black Americans. Also, the first Black woman traveled on the space shuttle, and the first Black woman was elected to the U.S. Senate. In addition, major Black marches took place in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia. Saida, who is joining us online, how were these events reflected in the campus climate? If any, what student organizations were born during this time and what were their purpose?
Greetings, everyone. Thank you. I'm very honored to be a part of this. Hey, Keisha. What's up, girl? There was a lot that happened. I went to Albright from 1988 to 1992, and I remember checking to make sure that Albright had divested before I accepted, because that was a very, very important subject for me. Now, there was a lot that happened. There was the African American Society. When in January of 1989, I'm a domino player, and we were doing 110 in the Shade. And I played a character named Snooky, who was being courted by a character named Jimmy. The guy who played Jimmy was Caucasian, and I'm African American. And so you got to see them have a cute little duet, and they ended up getting together. Well, I remember the first instance of racism on Albright that I remember was that, because shortly after we opened, there was a KKK sign hung in the campus center. And a lot of us got together to say, what is going on? Why is this happening? Why are people disturbed by this interracial coupling on the stage when that was actually happening in the student body? So we had some discussions about that. There were more and more people who joined the African American Society. I cannot remember how many African American students there were at the campus during my time there, but there were enough of us to make some noise. Albright Unity was created and became very popular for their retreats, and also the different kind of discussions they would have, especially about political correctness and the insincerity of political correctness. There was a lot of dialogue. Then there was Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill and the Senate Judiciary Committee trials. That was a big one. There were a lot of discussions. There were a lot of lectures from the African American side and also from the women's studies side, because that was also one of my majors. And then he got confirmed. And then the Rodney King beating also happened. That was big as well, because we also had one-on-one discussions. We also had lectures at Albright Unity and other lectures about that, and how wrong it was, what the real issues were, because everybody was talking about it. My background I grew up in basically a suburb of Baltimore, in Baltimore County. It was a predominantly Jewish community, but I come from a very Afrocentric household. So while I grew up with a lot of white people around, I also know that I'm Black. And I also it's within my the way I've been raised, and also within my personality, to challenge people when I feel they're doing wrong, especially when they're not acknowledging African Americans and other people of color and women in the correct light. So that's what I remember. And I also will say that my class of 1992, it seems like we were a very vocal group who participated you were at least in like 6 different groups. You weren't just in African American Society or the women's group. You were in Amnesty International. We did a bunch of things because we all wanted to have a lot of communication with each other and with the schools, so that it could be better for students that came after us.
Thank you, Saida.
In the 2000s, there seemed to be a time of moving forward, with Ray Killian being convicted of the Freedom Summer murders in Mississippi and Barack Obama becoming US president and receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. Albright saw its first Black homecoming king and queen, and Zion's step team came on the scene. Aaron, Denier, Chantel, and Ariel. You all were graduates during this decade. I would like each one of you to please speak about what changes, if any, did you notice on campus, and how did it affect you and other students?
I can start if that's okay with Denier. Hello, Aaron. Hello, Chantel. We all know each other. So that's good to see some folks. I'm going to start, and I had a very mixed bag when I was at Albright College. Dean Daniels was the Black dean at the time, and I don't think I was among her favorite because I always had a job for her at that campus. When I came to Albright for my family, I was a first generation student. My mom was proud that I was a Joseph E. Coleman scholar. I think my mother was so proud. She told the whole church, the whole neighborhood. I was very upset because my first choice was an HBCU. And by the end of summer was any HBCU. So when I came to Albright, it wasn't where I wanted to go. And then I met Sabrina A. Butler, and she said this was my only choice, and I'm happy to be here. And A stands for Albright College, and she was another Black student. So meeting her on my floor across from our room, it gave me, I guess, hope. I also belonged to the Albright Gospel Ensemble for all 4 years that I was there. I was a dancer on the Albright dance team for maybe 2 years, and then I gained weight and I couldn't get in the air anymore. So then I wasn't a dancer anymore for Albright College. I actually worked 3 jobs. I worked at the Albright Phonathon. I think I was among the first folks. I was a PE and an RA. And then I also worked in the rec. Because at that time, that Albright tuition, even though I think I was a Dean Scholar and I wasn't a Jacob Albright Scholar, which I was very upset about, there was a gap, right, as a first generation student, and my mother was a single mother. When I came in August, Aaliyah had just died, so it was very sad. The second Bush was president, so that was very interesting conversations for my political science classes and my human rights classes. We did a lot of talking about resettlement and land redistribution, because Zimbabwe at the time, it was a frame of them giving back land to Black farmers. So that was happening. The shoe bomber, if anybody remembers, that was a thing that was happening. But Albright, even though I found my people, right, and I mean, we didn't have any Divine Nine at the time. So I belonged to an organization that really became a retention space and initiative for Black women, because there wasn't anything for us that we kind of did underground. Campus safety, I did not have a good engagement with campus safety. And we were always researching what happened to Black students prior to our arrival. So the sit-ins of the library we use as our reference a lot. I was a part of African diaspora during my year, and that was first established. And we really wanted to talk about the diaspora of what it meant to be Black, because we were pigeonholed for one belief about Blackness. And we were always searching for a sense of belonging on the campus. I was always leading a protest, in a protest, organizing something, needing to ask for more Black faculty. So yeah, Dean Daniels, I probably at the time wasn't her favorite, but I do DEI work now in higher education. And I come into contact with students who were like me very often. And I think Albright helped equip me for my experiences. There was also what we had, the unofficial Black orientation, where they would pour salt on the table and then they would sprinkle Black pepper. And they would say, "Welcome to Albright College." So that was like my unofficial orientation. I was also into sustainability at the time. So everything that George Bush was doing under the energy plan was very interesting to me. If anybody remembers, I remember my human rights class, there was this whole Congress of like, where's the actual documents about the plan and the funding? That was like a big thing happening at that time. Those are just some of the things that I remember, but that atmosphere, although we found each other, like I talked about in the beginning, to make a way for ourselves, myself and even Denier and Aaron and Chantel, they helped me, because I was trying to transfer every semester. It wasn't until I got probably into my 3rd year that I was like, I guess I'm gonna just be here. And so that I tried to really make a way for it. But again, I think it was training ground. I had some experience. I remember going to a party off campus in the woods, and then there was a Confederate flag, and I was like, what's happening? Somebody come pick me up. And I remember we got left behind on some trip, and we were saying no Black child left behind. I remember there was a fraternity incident where they were singing, "Put her in the cage, make it slave days." And I was very vocal, and I organized a protest because those fraternity members, all they got was community service. There was no kind of diversity work. There was nothing happening. And I feel like I leaned a lot on SGA because Denier and Chantel were on the SGA at that time. And so I'll stop talking and I'll hand it over to Denier or Aaron.
So, in a line, like going with what Ariel said, back then it was more about representation and getting things on campus for students that looks like us, because I was sad to hear the people before us that said you could count Black students on one hand. I probably would have transferred out the first week, because like Ariel, I was trying to transfer out as well. And then, I connected in that same organization, with women that looked like me. So that helped me to stay on campus, but it was about representation. So I want to say when I was there, I started out joining AAS. That was one of the first things I saw when I came to campus. I was looking for some organizations that had Black students. And when you first get to campus, you have pops and all of that. And none of the pops really looked like us. Maybe there was one pop that was Black, but I really don't think so. I'm just giving the benefit of the doubt and saying that there was one. But I joined AAS, and from there, Chantel and myself and Andrea Blasingame and a few others, really, I would say at that time, 50% of us were Black on SGA. And that was really how we were able to create other organizations. People had different interests. So Chantel, I don't think is on here. So the Caribbean Culture Club was created then. African Diaspora, like Ariel said. The hood that we were a part of had to go underground was because SGA and all of the white fraternity and sorority members was really trying to take away anything that represented African Americans. So when we got there, we were like, oh no, this isn't going to work. And all of us being who we are, vocal women and men at that time, really tried to do something, and we weren't having it. So when we were on SGA, we made sure that anytime people had a question, the question was turned right back around on all the white organizations that they thought were running campus. And in the end, it really was the Black students. And I'm not even sure if we were the first, with Andrea being the Black president, I was a vice president, and Chantel was a secretary. We weren't sure if that happened years before us, but we were very proud to represent, our culture and being there. And I would say some of the things that I remembered was Dean Daniels. Ariel brought this back to my memory. Dean Daniels making sure that in our last year when we were graduating, that we were, Chantel, myself, and I think a few others were pops. And I wasn't interested really, to be honest, but she was like, no, you guys need to do this. And the white students, they were having a fit. When they saw us show up to that first day and we were, these Black faces, and they were like, how did you get here? Did you apply? Did you do this? And we were just like, but we're here and we're going to, do what we needed to do to make sure that other students who came to campus felt welcomed. And they had people that looked like them, and most of us still keep in contact to this day, through social media. And we also had Tiff Archie, and Tiff was basically our advisor for everything. Any Black organization, we all wanted Tiff to be our advisor. We wanted to work for her. And then Dean Daniels as well. But I would say having those two Black representatives on campus was really major, for me, seeing these women. I was like, wow, they're doing their thing. They're bringing us in and getting us to do things and really empowering us to, I think, continue the work in our roles now, in our different jobs. The struggle hasn't changed, in which, we have to go into places being the only one that look like us and having to have the voice. And then, remain diplomatic so we don't be angry Black women. But I'm not going there today. And then in addition to that, for me, I wanted to see more support from Black professors, and I didn't necessarily feel like that on campus. I see Dr. Snyder. Hey, Dr. Snyder, she's my favorite professor at Albright College. So hopefully she's watching and smiling, because I talk about her all the time to this day. And although Dr. Snyder was not a Black professor, she definitely, for me, was very supportive as, this ambitious Black girl that came to Albright. And I was trying to graduate quick and get out of there. And she was, a voice of reason when I needed to be brought back to reality and like, okay, slow down, but she was very supportive. And unfortunately, I was hoping that more Black professors on campus would take an interest in other Black students who, didn't necessarily fit the road and the path that they wanted you to fit. But I was also grateful to have, someone like Dr. Snyder on campus. So I'll turn it over to Erin.
Thank you. One huge event that happened nationally that hasn't been mentioned during the 2000s is 9/11 happened in my senior year of college there. And I remember that day, how it shook the campus, and all of us scrambling, trying to find our way through and try to understand what was going on in our country and in the world. And one of the things that came out of that time, as you might remember nationally, is also a lot of hateful rhetoric towards Muslims. And I believe that was starting to grow on campus. And so what was going on through the newspaper and other discussions in classrooms was about Muslim extremism, and actually trying to have a better facilitated conversation about what it means to be an extremist, and also to actually what it means to want violence against people, but also what it means simply to be a person of the Muslim faith. So that was a huge part of the discussion of people of color, because it also happened that the small population of Muslim folks that we had on campus also happened to be people of color. So those voices started to rise while we were there at that time, which was very significant. And I feel like for a lot of the clubs and a lot of the different groups that students were a part of, the African American Society, the STEP team that started while I was there, another sisterhood that started while I was there. What was happening is that I believe the voices were starting to shift and change, because it started laying the groundwork for folks like Denier and Ariel and Andrea to actually have the opportunity to be in leadership in ways that wasn't happening in those couple of years when I was looking to come to Albright. It was also the neo-soul movement in the late 90s and early 2000s. So the voices of many people of color were coming out through a lot of the arts at that time. And a lot of multicultural voices were starting to rise at that time. And there was starting to be a breakdown of walls between, the African American Society and also the Asian American Society, all those folks that were starting to have conversations to start to work together as best we could at that time. And for me, what was significant at that time was that when I saw things that were happening on campus and in classrooms, I felt like I always had the ability to lift my voice and raise it. Whether or not everyone heard me is a whole other thing, because that's not, when you raise your voice, it's not your responsibility for everyone to hear you, because you just raise your voice. But I know one particular event happened for me as a student on campus. Someone wrote something on my car, and a racial slur, and I brought it up to campus through the newspaper, and that facilitated some different discussions in the African American Society as far as representation and talking about security and what goes on campus. That climate changed also because what we were noticing on campus is that some things that weren't being talked about is that there were some petty crimes going on where some cars were getting broken into, and folks were starting to look towards a lot of our people of color neighbors who were just down the street. And so conversations about what it means to be in an Albright community and also be part of the Reading community. And part of the community of color surrounding us was starting to happen at that time too.
Thank you for that. I had some technical difficulties there earlier, but Denier, I just wanted to let you know Tiff Archer is in the audience today, so she did hear your shout out. So,
hey, Tiff, where is she?
Forward to.
Oh my God. I don't know where I'm
This
at.
way. This way.
Hi,
Tiff is still helpful as a colleague. She helps try to publish with me. Tiff is the best still even now.
Yep.
So nationally, the 2010s unfortunately ushered in a bloody time again against Black Americans, which continued into the 2020s, but did foster a new form of protest in the sports arena. April, Lawrence, and Justin, who were students here on campus. How do you feel the students were impacted by these national events, and how did they respond?
Hi guys, I'm April, graduated in 2013. One of the biggest things I think I can remember, especially with violence against Black people, 2012 when Trayvon Martin was shot and killed in his neighborhood. That was a really big time, and where I think it was first put. I mean, we have all these events, the 90s riots and things like that, but really started the what I call woke culture. And at the time at Albright, if you kind of spoke out about that, you were kind of ostracized. I remember I was a theater student here. I had wrote a play called Life as an Oreo, and it was a one-woman show. And I mentioned in there, one of the scenes in there was me talking about, the violence against young Black men. And I remember feeling like I could not speak about that. And then the days after performing that show here, it was a lot of negative energy on campus. I was hearing about conversations about the show happening in different classrooms. And, April doesn't like white people. April doesn't like this. And it was really a hard time. Like, I had a mixed bag here at Albright. I think just some background on me. I grew up in Baltimore County in mostly predominantly white neighborhood. I went to a mostly predominantly white school all my life, hanging around mostly white people all my life. So I was prepared to come to a place like Albright. I remember my dad was not happy that I was choosing a white school over HBCU. And sorry, I'm just a little nervous talking. So I was ready for an experience like this, but also not at the same time. Being at Albright was the first time that I felt racism. I knew what racism was, but I didn't understand it until coming here, especially later in my college career here, when I started getting more of a voice as I got older. Coming in at 18, you don't know much, but by 22, you're like, you have more voice, more power behind it. So I just kind of felt that we weren't quite there yet. And I'm kind of jealous of people being now on campus and in the 2020s and having those opportunities. I mean, I was also a Joseph scholar, Joseph Coleman Scholar. And at the time, it was named as the Black Scholarship. People were like, oh, you got that Black people scholarship. But it was open to all people of color on campus. And that kind of made you also feel ostracized because, oh, well, I'm here only because of the scholarship, where people only see me as a Black scholar. So, yeah.
Hey, y'all all right? All right, just checking in. I'm sorry, professor side coming out. So for me, class of 2011, man, when Barack Obama won the election, this campus went off. I don't know about y'all, but whenever you do, the counting of the votes, it goes late into the night. So all of us stayed up. You would have thought it was like a Super Bowl or something like that. We had popcorn, we're like ready to go. And once they conferred and said, he's the 44th president, I promise you, the quad will never be the same. We went to the quad screaming, Obama, Obama, like had no complaints. It was like a serious thing. But what it did for me was it crystallized something. It helped me to recognize that current events become history. So when you're living in something, it's going to be somebody else's history. Like I can share that with my kids and their grandkids. And what really made that really come alive, fast forward 4 years later, I get an invitation from the White House to come be a part of a conference. And I'm sitting there, and guess what I thought about? Obama, Obama. And just the connection between running through the quad here at Albright, but here I am in DC, sitting at his last conference for interfaith. And people from around the world, 100 different countries. And just to kind of crystallize even more, the theme for Albright was, when I was here, was a different way of thinking. That's the theme? No? Okay, all right, I'm dating myself. So a different way of thinking. So I get invited to this conference, thinking about Obama. no one told me about the school that we were having the conference at. So it was called Gallaudet University. Ever heard of that? Okay, so I'm on campus and I'm like, excuse me, I need directions. And the gentleman's like, I'm trying to get to, this, I'm here for the presidential conference. And like, he grabs my hand and walks me. I recognize Gallaudet is a school for those who have hearing impairment or are deaf. And I was like, wow, how do we communicate when there are differences? Both real or imagined, felt or perceived. And I think Albright, although I wasn't prepared for that moment, but Albright helped me to think through, and my experience here helped me to think through what it means to connect with people that have differences that are seen, not seen, felt, or perceived. And as a Black male on campus here, I think my class was one of the largest classes. To hear that y'all got 33% Black students, 40% students of color, that's unheard of for many of us. But what I can say is my experience here helped me to communicate and think differently beyond just my own experience, because the world is not just a monolith or a silo. We have to connect and bridge the gap.
Thank you. Justin, do you have any comments?
I do. So as a matter of fact, when I was at Albright, between 2013 and 2018, the model was also a different way of thinking. And let me tell you, being there definitely causes you to be able to think outside of the box. I'm from Paterson, New Jersey, and Albright's only 2 hours away, but it was a big difference moving to like what felt like more of a suburban community and environment versus like that the heart of the city environment. So my time there, it was difficult for me to adjust. It was difficult for me to adapt. And I also was only in school to play football, right? That was culturalized for me. That was a thing. It was conditioned. Play ball and you go somewhere, right? So here I am in the mix. Who would have thought in the midst of everything that playing football pops up a big major event, with the whole Colin Kaepernick taking the knee and that going worldwide. We had a football player who's a quarterback, also took a knee at one of the games, and it kind of created this major uproar on campus between athletes, between faculty, between students. And so many people responded in so many different ways. You had positives, you had negatives. But all in all, I think it was a time for us to take a step back as the culture of Albright on campus was kind of coming to the surface, like as if everybody was still separated from each other. You didn't have too many people of different ethnic backgrounds hanging out with each other and doing all of these different types of things. So with that, I think President Fetro, who had came in and just took it right off the top. She handled everything that she needed to. Handle in terms of taking care of the media and being that face front. And then us as students had time to sit back and rebuild the community, the Albright community, between minority, Black culture, Asian culture, white culture, and bring it all together. And really, as students and student athletes, take heed to that and take off with it.
Thank you all for your comments and your experiences here at Albright. And I thank you all for being here. Please give yourselves, the panel, a round of applause, please.